So we're going to be talking about the lymphatic system. And involved with the lymphatic system are lymph tissues, and by lymph tissues I mean the lymph nodes, the spleen, the tonsils, Peyer's patches, and the appendix as well as the thymus. All of these tissues have a specific job or a specific role within the lymphatic and immune system. And there's also a network of vessels, and these vessels are also called lymphatics. And what these lymphatic vessels do is that we have, and the capillary beds and the capillary spaces in the body, in the cardiovascular system, we have exchanges going on between blood and all of our cells. Fluid, different chemicals, different things, proteins, ions, nutrients, germs, infectious agents get stuck in these tissue spaces, and we have these lymphatic vessels that are very low pressure, non-specific vessels that absorb all of this leak fluid, and up to 3 liters of fluid gets left behind a day from the cardiovascular system. And if you think about it, we have 6 liters total of blood. So half of our blood volume gets left behind and doesn't get reabsorbed into the capillary beds and come back from the venous system into the heart. So what needs to happen is that the lymphatic vessels are soaking up that left fluid, which is now called lymph. And again, it's not just clear, fluid with nothing in it. There's lots of cellular components inside of that. And the lymphatic vessels are then bringing that lymph back and putting it into the cardiovascular system. But they're not just dumping that fluid back into blood to keep up our blood volume. They're actually cleaning that lymph. And how are they doing that? They're doing that by sending and percolating that lymph through a series of lymph nodes. So what are the tissues involved in the lymphatic system? The lymph nodes, like I just told you, and we're going to be looking at the anatomy of those. The tonsils, which we have 3 sets of tonsils. The thymus, which is in the chest. Peyer's patches. The spleen. And the appendix. These right here, and here, and here, all of these organs here, they contain and they house immune cells. And those immune cells, besides other functions that they do, those immune cells are there to help with immunity and to help clean out infectious agents and things like that. The appendix, as we said the other day in class, is really a vestigial structure. It has really no known function. And what does it do? It tends to get inflamed and infected in people, and they can have appendicitis, which is inflammation of the appendix, and we'll have to have the appendix removed. So in this image, we're looking at our different lymphatic tissues around the body. We have lymph nodes that are spread all throughout the body. I told you that there are areas of the body where we have an aggregate of lymph nodes. So again, we have hundreds of lymph nodes around the body, but in the cervical region or the neck region we have a bunch, in the axillary region or armpit region we have a bunch, and in the inguinal region we have a bunch of lymph nodes. Okay? Other tissue that we have in the body, up here in our pharynx, we're going to have 3 sets of tonsils. In the chest, we have the thymus. Down here on the left side of our body, we have the spleen. And we also have that appendix, which is hanging off of, if I were to draw the large intestines here, like this. Okay, the appendix is hanging off the right side. So these are our lymphatic structures that are spread all throughout our body. What the tonsils are doing is that they're nodes of tissue in our throat where we have this, portal of entry in our body for all sorts of germs. And they are, again, filled with immune cells that can fight off infectious agents that have come into our body. There is the thymus, which is in the chest here. We talked about this back in chapter 10, and the thymus is the site of T cell growth, maturation, development. It's very active in youth and adolescence. However, over time, the thymus ends up atrophying, the tissue becomes non-functioning, and in adults, the thymus is not active. In the left quadrant over here, we have the spleen. The spleen is the site of red blood cell breakdown and recycling, as well as platelet breakdown and recycling. So it's a blood reservoir where it's looking through and sifting through all of our different types of blood cells and taking out ones that are just not functioning or not functional anymore. And it also houses immune cells such as B cells and T cells, B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes that are there to clear up any bad guys, if you will, that are in our bodies. The appendix down here, all right, again, there's really no known function at this point. It may have immune cells hanging into it, but a lot of times it just gets fecal matter stuck in it and becomes infected and can burst. Another thing that we haven't seen, and that would be, in the small intestines that would be located in here, is the Peyer's patches. And Peyer's patches are basically like the tonsils of the small intestine. So we have these nodes of tissue in the Peyer's patch, in the small intestines that are there, housing immune cells, because what happens in the small intestine, that's a major absorption area. That's where things are getting from the outside of our body, inside the alimentary canal, into our bloodstream. So we have these Peyer patches there that are there to help invaders that want to get inside our body. Looking at the structure of a lymph node, we drew this the other day. They're about 1 inch in length, and again, we have hundreds of lymph nodes in our bodies with the aggregate in those 3 regions that I talked about the other day. And the function of the lymph node is to clean lymph. It's going to take a series of lymph nodes to actually probably clean lymph pretty well, but I gave you the coffee filter analogy, where you have all of this water coming into a coffee filter. In this sense, is coming into the lymph nodes. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 roads in that are bringing in fluid, and 1 road out. And what's going to happen is that means that stuff is going to come really fast into the cell, but it's going to trickle out very, very slow. And that's a good thing, because it allows that fluid to sit here inside a lymph node where we have T cells and B cells and macrophages, which are phagocytes, okay? We have all of these white blood cells there to clean up and kill and deal with any foreign objects or not objects, but infectious agents or cells that are not looking the way they should look, like cancer cells or tumor cells, things like that. So many roads in, 1 road out. It's a good thing, because what happens is that the lymph, like I said, just kind of sits in here in this lymph node and gets cleaned. It's slowly looked at. It's slowly moving along this conveyor belt. I want to go over the specific anatomy of a lymph node. So we drew on the board the other day, there's this thing called a capsule, and that is a connective tissue sheath that goes along the outside of the lymph node here that protects it. Okay, it's like its outer covering, its outer coat. And then parts of the capsule actually come inside of the lymph node itself and make these little compartments. All right? And these little pieces of the capsule that come in are called trabeculae. These trabeculae are dividing sections of the outer portion of the lymph node, which is called the cortex. We talked about the outer portions of organs is the cortex, the inner portion of some organs is called the medulla. But the outer portion here is called the cortex. And the cortex is located out here, these areas that I've done here in orange. And this is kind of a blow-up of what that looks like. So the cortex here, I'm doing in orange. What's inside the cortex? We have T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes out there. So again, lymph is going through these areas, and it's being, if we have memory cells located here for, chickenpox, the flu, what have you, they can be, activated to start reproducing very, very quickly so that we can fight off whatever infectious agents, viruses, bacteria, what have you, that are inside of our body. The inner portion, which is right here, I'm doing in yellow, is called the medulla. So this is the medulla right here, okay? Inside of the medulla, or the inner portion, we have macrophages. And macrophages are non-specific cells that their whole job is to go over and engulf and eat and chew up and spit out basically bad cells. So it could be viruses, infected cells, it could be bacteria, it could be a cell that is a cancer cell or a tumor cell that is just not looking right. So macrophages are just kind of like Pac-Man, and they hang out in the medulla, which is the middle portion of the inner or middle portion of the lymph node. Now, as I mentioned before, we have these lymphatic vessels that are bringing lymph, which it picked up from lymph capillaries, that are bringing lymph into the lymph node, all right? There are a ton of what's called afferent lymphatic vessels that are bringing lymph into the lymph node, but there's only one efferent lymphatic vessel. And that efferent lymphatic vessel is just the one route, the one way out from all of this lymph that's coming into this lymph node. And what does this do? Multiple places coming in, one road going out, ensures that the lymph spends quite, a long period of time inside of the lymph node, being cleaned by all of our different types of cells. In this slide, we're looking at basically lymph nodes and lymphatic vessels that are spread throughout our body. Something that we're not seeing are the lymphatic capillaries. Remember, capillaries are at the microscopic level. We're not seeing them. They're one cell layer thick. So this is just showing our different types of, tissues that we have located around the body, lymph nodes, and lymph vessels. We can also see that we have aggregates in the axillary layer, in the cervical layer of the neck, and in the inguinal layer down here in the inner thigh. Another portion of the lymphatic system, and this is probably how you learned it before, is called the immune system. And our immune system has two branches to it. And those two branches are the innate and the adaptive. Innate is defenses that we are born with. Each and every one of us has these things. And these innate defenses that we have are non-specific. That means that it's just kind of a general defense mechanisms that we have to foreign invaders. The adaptive branch of our immune system is acquired, and that means that it's based upon our exposures to infectious agents throughout our lives. Another interesting thing about it is that it is specific. We create this arsenal of cells that, based on the exposures that we have cells in our body that are specifically targeted for a flu virus or chickenpox virus, or mumps, rubella, any of those viruses that probably each and every one of you have been vaccinated against. We have cells in our body, memory cells, that remember those viruses and are ready to attack and deal with them. So it's very, very specific, and that leads me into the fact that we get immunological memory with the adaptive immune system. So that means, and we talked about this the other day, the first time you get infected with something, you're probably going to show symptoms. The next time you get infected with it, you're going to have such a huge immune response that you are probably not going to be symptomatic whatsoever. So here we're looking at the different types of innate defense systems that we have in place when we're born. Again, these are non-specific. These are they'll attack anybody and anyone who tries to infect or invade our bodies. And what are they? Okay, we have surface membrane barriers. What's the biggest surface membrane barrier we have? It's our skin, all right, our largest organ. We also have non-specific phagocytes in our body. And again, phagocytes or macrophages are just like the Pac-Man, that they go over and eat anybody who doesn't look good, anybody who shouldn't be there, anybody who is non-self, okay? Natural killer cells. They sound pretty dangerous. These are a special type of T lymphocyte that are non-specific. And basically, if something is recognized as non-self, they're just going to go eat them and kill them. The inflammatory response. You probably have heard of RICE, if you're into sports, which is rest, ice, compression, elevation. RICE is meant to counteract the inflammatory response. The inflammatory response causes us to have swelling, causes us to have heat, causes us to have pain, and there's a reason for all those things that we're going to be talking about. Fever. We asked if fever was the devil. Fever is not the devil. Fever is actually an indicator that there is infection, there's something going on in our body, and our hypothalamus resets our thermostat, and that increase in temperature is actually good because it increases the metabolic rate of reactions going into our body to help heal us faster. And then finally here, we have this antimicrobial proteins. We had this conversation the other day. We are born with a set of proteins that enable us to, they're called complement proteins, to identify and beat infectious agents that get into our system. And the more diverse complement proteins you have, the better and the stronger immune system you have. So when you're related to somebody, you have similar complement proteins. And we talked about how, if we remember the nobility and looking at royalty and things like that, monarchs, how the children of all these kings and queens were sick because there was a lot of inbreeding that went on to try to keep the blood pure. So basically, these offspring had very, very little diversity in their complement proteins, which made them more susceptible to infectious agents. These together, all right, these 6, we're going to be learning more in-depthly, and they are part of our innate defense system. Again, it's something that we all have. We're all born with these things, and these are non-specific. This is our first line of defense. They are quick, they attack, they go wherever they need to go, and again, non-specific, first line of defense. Our other branch of the immune system is the adaptive body defenses, and these are antigen specific. We talked about that word antigen the other day. An antigen is anything that can spark an immune response in our body. And that being said, we have these B cells and T cells in our body that get created, and they get marked for one specific antigen, and that is the one specific antigen that they're going to fight for the rest of their existence. Okay? So the adaptive body defenses don't just, oh, in general, we're sick, so we're going to go fight or cause a fever or cause inflammation. No, they are the memory cells that we have built up for strep throat are going to go fight strep throat. The memory cells that we have built up for a parasitic worm infection, those are the ones that are going to go to that area. So they are very, very specific based on the antigen that we are exposed to. And how does that happen? We have to have a prior exposure. We have to have our immune system primed. How can we do that in a controlled way? We get vaccinations, so that in our natural environment, if we get exposed to this antigen, we already have that immunological memory inside of our body to be able to fight that infection. A lot of times in the innate or the non-specific immune system, it's kind of a localized event. So you get, a bruise on your knee. You're going to have pain, inflammation, swelling in that one area. It's not systemic. Systemic means that it's spread all throughout the body. The adaptive body defenses, when we have increased antibodies, when we have increased T cells, they are traveling in our blood, in our lymph, all throughout our body and affecting our entire body system. They are systemic. And finally, that last big piece is that unlike the innate immune system where there's no immunological memory, the adaptive has memory. So once we get exposed to that antigen, we're going to recognize it when we see it again, and we're going to mount an even stronger immune response against it. So the first time, yeah, we may get sick. The second time, you're probably not going to feel any type of symptoms because you're going to be able to, your memory cells in your body are going to be able to recognize that antigen and mount a huge attack against it and have these increased rates of white blood cells for a very, very long time.